Well, happy Monday, everybody. Happy Monday. Welcome back to the show. We are so glad that you are here. Hopefully you had a great weekend. I always get a kick when that song is playing. You guys should see me back here. Actually, you do see me back here, right? So we are having a good time. It is Monday. Hopefully you had a great weekend and a great day today after the Easter holiday. We are excited always to be here. This is Dr. Dwayne Wood. That's Wood with an E. The E stands for endocrinology. And here on this channel, I help to encourage you. I help to educate you and to empower you to take charge of your health, avoid complications, and live a healthy, fulfilling life. Tonight, we're talking about hemoglobin A1C. With over 422 million people around the world suffering from diabetes, we need to have a way to manage. We need to have a way to track. We need to have a way to see if our treatment is working. And the A1C has become kind of the gold standard. So we're talking about it tonight. What is it? What does it do? How is it calculated? All those questions we're going to answer tonight on the show. If you are new to the show, make sure that you put new in the comments so that we can welcome you. We would love to welcome you to our community and to our channel. If you do have questions, go ahead and make sure that you put a Q. Let's see if I can put that up there. Yeah, put a Q in front of your question so that we will know that that is a question that we can grab, and we will hold on to that as we get into the show tonight and as we talk about this very important topic, this very important subject. You see, I always am wearing a t-shirt, and tonight I am wearing the t-shirt from UAB. Sorry, I said UAH. I went to UAB, but I'm living in Huntsville, and this is the UAH t-shirt, the UAH Chargers. And just a shout out to you guys. We love what you guys do. I am an Oakwood grad, and know we do a lot of things. Our students do a lot of things with UAH. So thank you. And for all the faculty, all the staff who are over there, we thank you all so much. And there was a young man who helped me at the store, and I had his name written down, and man, I'm so sorry. Give me a shout out, okay? Go ahead and send me your name, so I'll give you props when I do see you. And just another one, actually, let me pop this one up here real quick. I was over at Home Depot getting, you guys see there's some lights back there. And I was over at Home Depot getting some lights for this, and a couple of guys over there helped me. And let's see, that is Brad and Maury. So guys, and this is the Home Depot on 72 out in Madison. So thank you guys for your help in all of that. I always like to give props to our folks when they help me out. So once again, welcome tonight. Very, very important topic that we're going to be talking about, hemoglobin A1C. And let's just get to it. Well, let's see. I see Dr. Charmaine. Hey, Dr. Charmaine, how are you? Let's give her a little hand clap. There you go. Thank you. All right, so let's get to it, guys. So hemoglobin A1C. as I mentioned at the top of our opening, that there are over 422 million people in the world that currently live with diabetes. In the United States alone, there are 37 million plus, and there are 88 million people who are pre-diabetic, who are not quite diabetic, but their blood sugars are elevated. And so the hemoglobin A1C has become kind of the gold standard for the management of diabetes and for the tracking of diabetes and so forth. And, the hemoglobin A1C has had I don't want to say a bad rap, but a bad rap. There are commercials that you see. There are things that claim to do things to the A1C that may or may not be true. And so we're going to try to give you an idea of what the A1C is tonight, and maybe dispel some of that mythology. Okay, so the A1C, or hemoglobin, I guess, is the first thing that we want to talk about. We're talking about hemoglobin A1C, and it is a combination of two different words, right? So hemoglobin, right? Hemoglobin is a combination of two words. Heme, which means iron, and globin, which is a protein. And so put those together where we get hemoglobin. So hemoglobin is the substance that gives red cells their color, right? So when oxygen attaches to the hemoglobin, then we get that red color. And, really, if we go back in history, back in the 1950s, late 1950s, hemoglobin itself was elucidated. And, it wasn't until the 1960s where there was someone who said, hey, we can probably use this thing to measure blood sugar. So there was a correlation that was found that, hey, the higher the blood sugars are, the higher this thing, quote unquote, is, right? This hemoglobin A1C. Now, the interesting thing is that most of us, when we hear hemoglobin A1C, we probably believe that that's the only kind of hemoglobin that there is. But hemoglobin itself really has nothing to do with blood sugar, right? So hemoglobin has really nothing to do with blood sugar, because there are different things, different types of hemoglobin that we will see in the blood. There is fetal hemoglobin. So when a baby is first born, they have fetal hemoglobin, and that goes away. And then we get adult hemoglobin A, okay? We get adult hemoglobin. There is also hemoglobin that we find in certain disease conditions like sickle cell, right? So they have hemoglobin S, right? So we have the fetal hemoglobin, which is actually called hemoglobin F. We have the adult hemoglobin, and we have sickle hemoglobin, hemoglobin S, right? So there are multiple types, and I can go on and on with different types of hemoglobins. The reason hemoglobin A1C is called A1C is because when they found it, when they did the test initially, it was A1A, A1B, A1C, right? So they were trying to name these things as they were finding them, right? So hemoglobin A1C, right? So it was the C one that came out, and so it got the name A1C. Well, what does hemoglobin really do? So hemoglobin is what carries, as I mentioned, oxygen through the blood, right? It carries oxygen through the blood. And our red cells, bad choice of an analogy, but I'm going to use it anyway, right? Diabetics. The red cells almost look like a donut, right? This round thing, and the center is thin. It's not quite a hole that goes through, but it looks almost like a donut that's kind of floating through the blood. And within the donut, there are these things called hemoglobin. And on the hemoglobin, or in the hemoglobin, there is some iron. And as this red cell is going through the blood, then it bumps, if you will, into blood sugar, and that's where we kind of get this hemoglobin A1C. And we'll talk a little bit about how that works here in a minute. So red cells, our red cells that are in the blood, they live on an average between 90 and 120 days. 90 and 120 days. Now, they don't all like get born on day 1 and die on day 120, right? So some are born on day 1, some are born on day 2, 3, 4, 5, day 90, right? Day 120, there are some born. So within the blood, at any one time, there is a blood cell that was born maybe 90 days ago, or 1 day ago, or a minute ago, right? So there's just this hodgepodge of different cells that have been born at different points in time. But on average, right, they live between 90 and 120 days. And so if you talk to, diabetics, if you talk to your doctor, if you read every book, they will tell you that the hemoglobin, we use it to measure blood sugars on average for 90 days. And that's the reason that we do that, because that's the length of time that these guys are living. And that's just an average that we get of the cells that are there. Okay. So as those cells are born, they are born. And if you go back to my donut analogy, I've got to find a different analogy, but that's okay. Right. So if you think about like a glazed donut, right? You think about a glazed donut. That's how the cell is born, right? It's born with a smooth surface, if you will. Okay. And as it comes out of wherever it was born, bone marrow, for example, as it comes out of there, it begins flowing through the blood vessel. And it's in what we call blood, right? So you see this one cell, and you can imagine it kind of flowing through. And there are millions of cells, right? But we're going to just pick up one of those. And that cell is kind of flowing through the blood. And as it's flowing through the blood, it bumps into sugar. And you could think of sugar like those little sprinkles that you put on donuts, right? So the more sprinkles that are in the blood sugar, the more get attached to the donut. And after a while, if you look at the donut, it's covered with these sprinkles, right? So that's an analogy of what's going on in the blood. These cells, these red cells, are born, and they're pretty cool. I mean, they don't have anything attached to them. There's no sugar that's being attached. But as they flow through the blood, the higher the amount of sugar that's in the blood, the more gets attached to them, and we get what we call this glycosylated, right, hemoglobin. And glycosylated just means that the sugar has been attached to that cell, to the hemoglobin in particular. And that's where we get the hemoglobin A1C. And in order to measure that, what we do is, for instance, we may send you to the lab and get blood draw. Or even in an office like our office, you come in and they prick your finger and they get some blood. They put it on a slide, or they put it in this machine. And the machine, essentially what it's doing is it's counting the amount of sugar that was attached or has attached to the cell. Okay? That's a little bit more complicated than that, but that's is essentially what's happening. So the red cell has gone through the blood. It's bumped into all of these sugars. The sugar has attached to the red cell, and then we basically take the red cell and we put it in a machine and we count how many sugars are on it. Okay, and some smart person at some point was able to write a formula and do some analysis to say that, hey, if my hemoglobin on average is hemoglobin A1C on average is X, that means that my average blood sugar must be Y. Okay, so they were able to make this correlation. And there's a formula that's out there. We're not going to go through the formula, but I'll give you kind of a thumbnail, right? I'm going to give you kind of a thumbnail. And there is, let me go ahead and I'll put this in the chat. All right, I'll put this in the chat, and here it is. All right, so this is a website with a formula or a calculator. So you can actually go to the calculator and you could type in what an average blood sugar is, and you will get a number. So let me see. I'm gonna actually, I always do this. We're gonna see if it works. I'm gonna see if I can share my screen so we can actually do one together. How about that? First, I'm gonna get rid of all my stuff so you don't see all my junk, right? How about that? There we go. Okay, so let's see. Let's go back here, and I think this is the right one. Yep. All right, so here's the website, right? And let me see. I'm gonna go ahead and blow that up a little bit. Okay, and I'm gonna see if I can put myself on the screen. Let's see. Since we're here, now we try that. Here I come, guys. Here I come. Give me just a minute. Boom. Okay, so put myself right there. And of course, I'm gonna change from that camera to a different camera. There you go. There I am. Right? And then do this. All right. So can you guys see me? You should be able to see me now. There you go. All right. So I'm there. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and pop one of these things in. Okay. So here we are. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put some numbers in here. So for example, if my average blood sugar, say, is 100, you'll see that at that top one, it popped in an A1C of 5.1. Ooh, right? So average blood sugar of 100, it popped in an A1C of 5.1. If I change that to 125, it popped in an A1C of 6. And I'm doing this for a particular reason, right? I'm choosing these numbers. If you pop in a 150, an A1C of 6.9, which is 7, essentially, right? You pop in a 175, and you get an A1C of 7.7, which is an 8, essentially. Pop in a 200, and you get an A1C of 8.6, rounded up to 9, okay? Now, the reason, and let me come back to my screen here. Now, let me take myself on there twice. Boom, there we go. Now, the reason I chose those particular numbers, right? 100, 125, 150, 175, 200, is that my rule of thumb, I use 25s. Like if you look at the formula, it's like 26 point something, right? And so you'll get, blood sugar of 102 or 100 and whatever it is. But in order to make sense of it and it gives you a good gestalt of what the number is going to be, if you use 100 as an A1C of 5 and then add 25 each time you do the A1C, blood sugar, then that gives you a good correlation, right? So like we did a minute ago, 100 was an A1C of 5. 125 gave me an A1C of 6. 150 gave me an A1C of 7. 175 gave me an A1C of 8. And 200 gave me an A1C of 9. Okay. And so that's a pretty good way to do it. And so anyway, so there's this correlation now between the A1C, the hemoglobin A1C, and blood sugar. And so now we're able to have someone go to the lab or come to the office, check their blood, get some blood from them, whether it's a finger stick or actually a blood draw. We're able to put that in the machine, and from the machine, we're able to extract and see what their blood sugar average is. Okay. Now, people say, well, why do we even need an A1C? Why not just check the blood sugar? Well, remember, the A1C is a representation of blood that's been in your system on average of 90 days. So I can check your blood sugar right now, and the blood sugar is good, or it's high, or it's low. But that only tells me a point in time what the blood sugar is. But if I'm able to get an A1C, it tells me on average what the blood sugars have been for the last 90 days. Okay. And so that's the importance of it, because it gives me an estimate of what blood sugars have been running over the last 90 days. So for instance, even people who are not checking blood sugars, which I don't advise, right? So if you're diabetic, please check your blood sugar. So even people who have not checked their blood sugars were able to get an A1C, and then that A1C now reflects what's been going on with their blood sugars for the last 90 days. Okay? So that's the benefit of it. The other benefit of it is that we are able to compare what they are now to what they may be in the future, right? So we're able to do that over periods of 90 days, over the periods of 90 days. So that's what the A1C does. That's how it's calculated. Okay. And that's essentially what's going on in the blood, right? Remember my donut analogy, right? So that's what's going on. All right. So if we kind of pick up where we left off, right? So that was a nutshell of hemoglobin A1C, what it does. Now there are lots of different things that have happened to the A1C over time, right? In the mid, 2009, the committees got together. So what was happening at the time was that A1C was being done, but there were so many different ways to do it that it wasn't standardized. So you got an A1C in California, and they did it and they got a number. And then you got an A1C in New York and they did it, they got a different number. And even if they got the same number, there was no way to say that those two numbers meant the same thing, right? Because the tests that they did on how to do the A1C were so different. Now, I think at one point they had like maybe 30 different or more than 30 different ways of measuring the A1C, okay? And so even though we wanted to use the A1C, it was not standardized across the board. And so we couldn't necessarily use it to diagnose someone with diabetes. And as the test became better and better and more standardized, then finally we were able to say, oh, no, if you check an A1C in, Colombia, right? And you got an A1C in Huntsville, Alabama, and they told you that your blood sugar, your A1C was a 5.9, that's what it meant. And it was the same thing across the board. And so once it became standardized, now we're able to say, hey, no, we can use this now to diagnose diabetes, right? Remember, prior to that, we were doing fasting plasma glucose, and we were doing the oral glucose tolerance test. And many of you may have used that in the past to be diagnosed, or if you have been pregnant, they do that glucola challenge, right? So let's walk through those here really quickly. So let's talk about the fasting plasma glucose, right? So a normal blood sugar is less than 99, okay? And in actuality, there are people who are walking around who are not diabetic. They're not having hypoglycemia. They can have blood sugars down to 60. Like if we take a very fit person, slim person who hasn't eaten overnight, they can have blood sugars down to 60. And a lot of times they don't even feel that. And that's their normal, right? So anywhere south of 99 is considered normal, a normal blood sugar. If we get from 100 to 125 blood sugar, fasting blood sugar, that is considered pre-diabetic. So 100 to 125. And then if you're 125 or higher, then that's considered to be diabetes, the diabetes range. Okay. So once again, we can use fasting plasma glucose to kind of diagnose some of the same things. And we'll talk a little bit here in a minute. Some additional reasons why the A1C is a good thing to do. If we go with the oral glucose tolerance, right? So you take the 70 grams of carbs or whatever they give you, right? The orange drink, as some people call it. And blood sugars, right, that are 200 or higher is considered diabetes, right? Up to 99 is considered pre-diabetes. Right? Notice that those numbers are higher, okay, which makes sense. And then now switching to A1C, if we have an A1C of 6.5 or higher, then that's considered diabetes. if we have an A1C from 5.7 to 6.4, that's considered pre-diabetes. And then less than, what did I say, 5.7? Less than 5.7, right, is considered diabetes. Okay, so that's the range. And they really correlate with each other. Okay, they really correlate with each other. So why, if those things are so good, why not just do them? And we don't do them for a couple of reasons. One, the oral glucose tolerance test can be cumbersome, right? You're only getting a point in time compared to this 90 days. For instance, there are people who can have an oral glucose tolerance test that shows diabetes and still have a normal A1C. Right? So depending on what their blood sugars are doing at a particular time, right? They can be different. And so, years ago we say, okay, you got to have 2 of these before you can be actually diagnosed with diabetes. Okay. All right. So let's see who we've got with us. Oh, Lauren. Hey, Lauren, how are you? Welcome. Glad that you are here to hang out with us tonight. Glad that you're here. All right. So that's pre-diabetes, diabetes, A1C, and all the other things. Now, remember I said that A1C is actually an average, right? So it's kind of like my son goes to school and he has all these tests over the course of a semester, right? And then at the end he gets an average grade that's based on all the tests. So that's what that's like. So your blood sugars are the test. Not even if you're not testing it, if you're not checking it, it's still in your body, right? And so the body's keeping a record of that. And then at the end, we can get that A1C, and the A1C gives us a cumulative idea of what that is. Okay. So we use the A1C to diagnose people with diabetes. We use the A1C to diagnose people with pre-diabetes. And of course, there are other things, gestational diabetes and so forth. And so your doctor may work with you if your A1C is increasing to say, hey, we've got to do something to get this heading back in the other direction, right? So several people that may come to us, right? So sometimes we get a referral for pre-diabetes or even sometimes insulin resistance. And what those doctors will do is they say, hey, this is a regimen that we need to work on to help you head back in the other direction. Because remember, as we've talked about before on this channel, that insulin resistance is what is a precursor for diabetes. And so insulin resistance leads to pre-diabetes. Pre-diabetes leads to diabetes, and if we're not careful, that progression continues, and then we run into other types of issues. Okay, all right. So if you have ever had an A1C checked, right, for whatever reason, right, not necessarily you're diabetic, go ahead and put yes in the chat. Right, if you've ever had an A1C checked, go ahead and put that in the chat. All right. So here's an interesting point to make as we go a little deeper, right? So the A1C is an average of blood sugars. And the question is the A1C always correct? I'm going to pause for a minute. Let's pause for effect, right? Is the A1C always correct? Right? Well, you can imagine that if it is an average, and one thing, I guess, guys, let me kind of give you a little thought process that sometimes goes on, and this has been going on for years, right? We've had these conversations, and here's the conversation: we can have 2 people that have the exact same A1C and have blood sugars that are very different from each other, right? So let's pick a number, right? Let's pick an A1C number, and let's pick an A1C of let's say 7, right? And if we put it in the calculator, an A1C of 7 would correlate with an average blood sugar of 150 milligrams per deciliter. Okay, So we can have someone who has an A1C of 7, and we look at their glucose meter and their average, right? If we look at all the numbers, their average blood sugar is 150. And if you look at the actual numbers themselves, they're all of them approximated in 150. Maybe he has a 149, 152, maybe a 148, a 132 every now and then, 160, 165, right? And if you average all those together, then that person has an A1C or an average blood sugar that comes out to 150. And then the A1C then correlates to correlates to that blood sugar. And so the A1C is now a 7. Okay, so they've got a 7 A1C, average blood sugar 150. Okay, that makes sense. You look at another person, and they also have an A1C of 7. Their average blood sugar is 150. But when you look at their blood sugars on their meters, they have blood sugars that are high, really high, and blood sugars that are really low. But when you average the two together, you get a 150. Right? So that's one of the limitations of the A1C. It tells us what the average is, but it doesn't tell us how they did or how they've been doing, right? It's kind of like having a test, okay? And you got one kid who has an exam, and I'm going to pick an easy number, right? So I can do it in my head. So they have... They took 2 exams, and on both exams, they got 100. And so now the average is 100, right? Or you have another kid who took 2 exams. Well, it doesn't work for 2 exams, but they took 2 exams, and let's say they did some extra credit, right? So one of the tests, they did some extra credit, and it brought their score up to, like, say 200, right? So they got 100 points extra. But on one of the tests, they got a 0. So they got a 0 on one. And on the other test, the teacher says, okay, hey, we're going to give you some extra credit. And so now they've averaged together. And if you average that together, guess what they have? Guess what their average is? It's 100, right? But the 2 exams are totally, totally different. And so that's what the A1C doesn't capture. It doesn't capture the variability that we have in blood sugars. Okay. All right. So now let's move on, and let's talk about the fact that there can be things that can either falsely elevate or falsely lower the A1C. Okay. Yeah, so it's things that falsely elevate or falsely lower the A1C. Well, what types of things? Before we get into specifics of them, you can probably imagine that anything that causes those red cells, remember I told you those red cells are born and they live for between 90 to 120 days. So anything that would cause those cells to die faster, right? So for instance, they start dying at 60 days. Anything that causes those cells to turn over more quickly would cause an A1C that would be falsely lowered. Okay? So there are some disease processes that do that. And we mentioned sickle cell, right? So in sickle cell, those patients, they have A1C, or they have red cells that are turning over faster, right? Because they're being damaged because of the sickling. And so if you check their A1C, then their A1C can be lower, not because that's what their average blood sugar is, but because their cells are being turned over, they're being destroyed faster. Okay? So that's one group. Now, there can be another group where the cells live longer for some reason. And if those cells live longer, they're in the blood for a longer time, and so they begin picking up more sugar. Not that the sugar is higher, but they've just been there for so long that they start picking up more things, right? So all of those types of things. So things that can falsely elevate, would be anything that will make those cells turn over faster, right? So things like, asplenia, so someone who doesn't have a spleen, some in iron deficiency, right? And sorry, I'm talking about elevate. So these are A1Cs that are elevated, right? So asplenia, iron deficiency, B12, folate deficiency, right? So anything that will cause the erythrocyte lifespan to stay would be higher. Okay, so those will cause elevations in the A1C. And then, of course, there are things that will cause the A1C to go down, and these are the things we just talked about. Hemolytic anemia. Even patients who may have problems with their kidneys can have that as well. Okay. Here's an interesting one that we sometimes don't think about. So remember, the A1C is a marker of what's going on in a person's blood. So if someone gets a blood transfusion, they're getting blood from someone else. And that blood may not have, if for instance, that person doesn't have diabetes, then their blood cells don't have glycosylated A1C to the degree that the diabetic has. So now we've taken that blood and we've added it to the person who has diabetes, and we've basically diluted their blood. And if we check the A1C now, remember we get a sample of blood, we put that in the machine, and the machine counts, but it's being diluted, and so we get a false number. All right, so those are some reasons. Things like pregnancy can also do it, right? Some medications, HIV medications, can cause it as well. So there's just a myriad of things that can cause A1C to be falsely elevated or lowered. And then there are even ethnic differences in A1C, right? So they've had studies that show that African Americans, Hispanics, indigenous Americans have A1Cs that are anywhere from 0.3 to 0.5. I think I saw one study 0.6 higher than Caucasians. So for instance, you take two people, right, Caucasians and black, and you send them both to get blood work. And the diagnosis for A1C, for diabetes, is 6.5, right? 6.5 or higher. Well, if the African American has an A1C of 6.5, he's considered diabetic, right? And the Caucasian has an A1C of, 6.1, right? So he's not diabetic. But is that because he's really diabetic or because of the ethnic differences? And I say that we have not yet figured out how to factor that in. Okay. So for now, if you have a 6.5, you are considered a diabetic. Let me just throw that out there. All right. So don't go to your doctor and say, hey, I'm African American, so mine is not true. No, we have not been able to factor that in. Okay. This is a good point to make good place to make another point. And the point is this: I told you that in 2009, mid 2009, the diagnosis for using A1C. Before that, we were having all these conversations, right? And someone who had an A1C of 6.5 was not considered diabetic. And then we changed the rules. And the reason, I don't want to say we changed the rules, we changed the criteria. Let me use that word, because changing the rules make it sound ominous or devious. We changed the criteria. And the reason we changed the criteria is that we were finding that people who had A1Cs that were lower, who were not diabetic, according to the criteria, were still having the complications of people who were diabetic. And so the range was shifted down a little to capture those people so that we can begin treating them, right? Or we can begin intervening. Because one of the phrases that I sometimes have a problem with is the phrase pre-diabetes. Pre-diabetes. I sometimes have the problem with the phrase pre-diabetes. Because when we say pre-diabetes, it's almost like people take a sigh of relief. They're like, oh, wow, whew, I'm so glad I'm not diabetic, right? And so they basically kind of relax. But do you know remember I told you the difference between a diabetic and a pre-diabetic? A 6.4 is pre-diabetic and a 6.5 is diabetic. So it's not that big a difference, guys. So we want to begin intervening early. And as everything that we've said before, the earlier intervene, the better it is for the disease process. Okay, cool. All right, let's go and see who we have. So Lauren is saying, hey, Dr. C, always enjoyed the discussion and education you two provide. Dr. C says, yes. So A1C, PCP includes it in routine screening labs. Yes. So a lot of times the PCP will do that. And the criteria for checking A1C, we used to be very selective, but there's so much diabetes, pre-diabetes out there, right? So if you're 45 or higher, if you've had gestational diabetes, if you've had a baby over 9 pounds, if you have a family history, if you're part of certain ethnic groups, if you have metabolic syndrome, if you have high blood pressure, high cholesterol, right? So if you're obese, if you have PCOS, and there's so many things that now predispose to diabetes. Acanthosis nigricans, remember we talked about that. Skin tags, right? All of those things predispose to diabetes. So the list of people who should be screened is getting longer and longer and longer. And it really is a way to help. Okay. Let's see. And so Dr. Charmaine says, I've had a glucose tolerance test too. All right. And let's see, Florence. Hey, glad that you're here. Woohoo! Glad that you're here. And Lauren, I didn't give you a hand clap. Glad that you guys are here. And guys, if you have not already done so, please make sure you check us out on all of our social media platforms, LinkedIn, TikTok, here, of course, on our show, Twitter, and then buymeacoffee.com. If you're interested in seeing more of our exciting content, please make sure that you join us every Monday, TikTok, 10 o'clock on Fridays. And then our Twitter, we've actually changed. It says 9 o'clock there. I need to update that. So we've actually started putting those out now at 3 a.m. so that when you wake up, it's already out there. Okay. All right. And then, of course, our coaching, and we'd love to be involved in helping you get unstuck, whether we are talking about coaching for diabetes or any kind of life coaching. There's so many times that people just are stuck in a particular place, and we would love to be able to be a part of helping you move forward in your life. Because remember, that's what we do here, right? We educate, we empower, and we encourage you to take charge of your health, avoid complications, and live a healthy, fulfilling life. That's what we do on our channel. All right. So we've talked about those racial differences. And so the question then becomes, are there alternatives for A1C? Okay, are there alternatives? So over the last several years, right? I mean, maybe 5-6 years or so, people have been talking about time in range as a new measure or new marker of how well people are doing with their diabetes. And what that time in range means, how much time are you spending within a certain range? When we talked about those two patients where one had really high blood sugars and really low blood sugars, and you average it together, and that gave you a good A1C, right? So there are some drawbacks to doing the A1C, along with certain disease processes, certain ethnic groups that can have falsely elevated or lower A1C. And so there are a couple of things, something called fructosamine. Fructosamine is one that we use, albumin. And then, of course, with the advent of monitors that are continuous, right? And when it's continuous, they're kind of semi-continuous, but they check blood sugars every 5 minutes. So we get a better representation of what those blood sugars show and what those blood sugars can do. And so those are things that we can use. One of the drawbacks of them, though, is that, for instance, fructosamine, which is doesn't rely on the glycosylated red cell or hemoglobin. It uses another way of measuring that. But those cells, or that process, only measures between 30 and 60 days, right? So it doesn't give us the length of time that we are used to. Not that it's bad. I mean, because if we don't have something else that we can use, then that's a good way to do it. But it doesn't give us all the things that we need. Okay, so there are some alternatives. Now, here is one of the big things that I see and I talk to my patients about. I see this on TV all the time. Commercial comes on and it says, lower your A1C by taking this medication. Lower your A1C by taking this medication. And the implication is almost that you can lower your A1C independent of lowering your blood sugar. And let me say to you, you cannot lower an A1C independent of lowering a blood sugar, right? Because the A1C is a representation of the blood sugar for the last 90 days. So if you are talking to someone, or you see a commercial, or you see anything in writing that says, hey, we're going to lower your blood sugar, the first question is, okay, how are we going to, you're going to lower your A1C. The first question is, how are we going to do that? What are we going to do to the blood sugar? If they say, oh yeah, don't worry about the blood sugar, then you know that can't be a process that is beneficial, right? Because the A1C is a marker of what the blood sugars are. What the marker of what the blood sugars are. Okay? All right. So here, guys, this is a great place for us to have our thought of the day. All right, so our thought of the day has to do with self-talk. And we've talked about this before. So self-talk is what happens during the conversation with yourself. What do you say to yourself? How do you respond to yourself? When something happens, what words come to mind, or even what words come out of your mouth? If those words are negative, if those words are defeatist, guess who's listening? You are. Right? It's almost like having a mini you sitting on your shoulder that's listening to everything you say and everything you think. And the body is a wonderful piece of machinery. The body likes to be right, and it likes to be safe. So anything that it thinks puts it in danger, or anything it thinks is making it incorrect, it will find evidence to support. Or to refute, as it support. Okay? So if you say, I can't do a thing, right? If those are the words that you say, if those are the thoughts that you have, if that's what you've internalized, your body will begin, your mind will begin to find evidence to support the fact that you can't do that thing. That's too difficult. Okay, the body says, the mind says, now let's find some reasons why that is difficult. Because we don't want to be wrong. And so the body and the mind continues to listen. And so our self-talk is so important that we begin to change that talk, that we begin to change what we think, that we begin to do and say things that are more affirming, things that are more aspirational and goal-oriented, and we are making strides in those directions. Because if we don't, mini me, sitting right on the shoulder, listening and trying to find evidence to support what you just said and what you just thought. So my challenge to you is to begin changing the words that we say. Begin changing the thoughts that we have. So things are probably challenging, but that doesn't mean that you can't do it. It means you probably haven't learned how to do it yet. It doesn't mean that this is too hard. It means that you don't have the skill as yet. It doesn't mean that this is never going to happen, but it means that it hasn't happened yet. Notice the changes in words. Notice the phrases that I'm using. So that's what I challenge you with, to go ahead and begin incorporating those changes in your thought process, those changes in your verbiage, because you are listening, and we will find evidence to support the things that we think and the things that we believe. Thank you. All right. So it looks like we got some other folks here. So Natalie, hey guys, that's my sister. Very good. Hey, Natalie, thanks for coming through. Dr. Charmaine says, start your day with positive affirmations. Targeting your negative self-talk is a way to improve your negative self-talk. That is so important. So important. I recently, I told you guys that I'm doing a course, and they've given us a list of affirmations for us to listen to on a daily basis, right? As we, in the morning and in the afternoon, and just affirmations that can help to build. We've got a self-talk one. We've got a doubt one. We've got a forgetting the past one. And so all of these things now, remember, we're changing the mind. And as we've said before, our thoughts about a thing is what determines our feeling about a thing. And our feelings about a thing determines our action about a thing. And our actions are what gives us the result. Dr. Charmaine saying, hey, Natalie. Hey, Florence. Natalie says, hi, love. Love you, love it. And good to see everyone tonight. Okay. So ultimately, guys, that's A1C. But let me give you what I call the toolbox. How do we lower the A1C? Because it's a marker, right? How do we lower the A1C? Number one, it has to do with our diet. We've got to make choices. Let me tell on myself. This weekend, we had guests over, right? We had homecoming here. And one of my favorite things is carrot cake. Don't judge me. You have your own thing, okay? So mine is carrot cake. And we had some carrot cake left over, and it was outside on the refrigerator. And last night I went out. Was it last night? Yeah, last night I went out to get a piece. And I got a piece, and I'm eating it. And I looked at the rest of the cake, and I said, you know what? If I keep this cake here, guess what's going to happen to it? You got it. I'm going to eat it. So what I did was I took the lid off of it, and I turned it over into the trash. Right? Now, it would be interesting to go back and get it, but I didn't. Right. So I made a decision. Right. So making decisions about our diet. And when I say diet, I'm not talking about going on a diet. I'm talking about a lifestyle change. Right? Making a lifestyle change. Number two, exercise. I have on my to-do list, my daily to-do list, and the last several days I've not done it, is to get on the elliptical outside, right? I was watching on Facebook, I told you we had homecoming, and one of the guys that I follow, Neil Davis, right? He has a fitness program, And so he was out doing some stuff, and I texted or I sent a message on Facebook and saying, hey, I should have been there with you guys. He says next time. Okay. So exercise. Number 3, water. Drinking water. Drinking water helps with blood sugars, helps with A1C because we're diluting the sugar. And then number 4, our medication and any of the supplements that we're using, right? Medication and supplements that we're using to manage blood sugars. That's your toolbox. And using those gets us better results. Because it's great to know about the A1C. It's great to have all this information about what the A1C does, where is it from, right? But ultimately the question is, what do we do with it? And so for you, for those of you who are watching, those of you who are watching now, those of you who are watching the replay, that's my challenge to you, right? Get your doctor to check your A1C. Do the things that you've got to do if you're diabetic to get it under control. If you're pre-diabetic, go ahead and begin working to reverse that A1C. And if you are not in the diabetic range or pre-diabetic range, continue doing the things you need to do to avoid progression into those areas. Guys, I'm always happy when you're here, always excited that you're here. Let's see, I think I have a couple of quick questions that we can do. Let's see, what do we have? I thought we did. Let's see. Okay, here's one. Do you have to fast to test A1C? The answer to that is no, you don't. Because remember, the A1C is an average of over the last 3 months. So you do not have to fast to have an A1C test done. Let's see. Can hemoglobin A1C be lowered? The answer is yes, you can lower the A1C by using those things that we just talked about in the toolbox, right? Exercising, making sure that you're taking care of your diet, making sure you're drinking water, and whatever medication and or supplements that you are using, making sure that you're using those optimally. Is there an A1C that causes complication? Wow, that's a good one. Is there an A1C that causes complication? The answer to this is a little, I don't want to say tricky, but we believe that it is elevated blood sugars that causes damage. Elevated blood sugars cause damage. So it really doesn't matter how high the blood sugar is. In other words, not at a particular level, right? So we don't have to wait till a particular level before we see damage. But anytime the blood sugar is elevated beyond normal, it can cause damage. So the answer to that is there probably is an A1C, right? So, I mean, if we want to use what we've just talked about, an A1C of 6.5 or higher, definitely in the diabetic range. But even people who have pre-diabetes, right, those higher blood sugars can continue to cause damage as well. Let's see, is time in range as good as A1C? So time in range is what we talked about, where we keep the blood sugar within a certain range over time, right? So time in range. Is it as good as an A1C? And currently we don't use time in range for diagnoses. We do use it to help to manage diabetes. And if we have a condition where the A1C we don't think is reliable, like one of those conditions that falsely elevates or lowers A1C, or if we're part of an ethnic group that may have a higher A1C, then time and range certainly gives us those numbers that we can use to make some decisions. Okay, so I hope that answers that question. Can A1C be too low? Can A1C be too low? And this one has, can A1C be too low? It has two answers. One, let me talk about the answer for someone who is a diabetic, particularly someone who is on medication, right? So if you are on medication, remember, we want to drive that A1C down as low as possible without causing hypoglycemia or low blood sugars. So if you are having low blood sugars and your A1C, even if it's good and you're having low blood sugars, we don't want that because low blood sugars have their own complications, right? If you are not on medication and not having hypoglycemia, or you're not diabetic and having hypoglycemia, then the answer is no, there is not an A1C that is too low. Okay. What A1C do you want for gestational diabetes? Good one. So for gestational diabetes, we want A1Cs that are in the normal range. And what did we say the normal range was? That's right, less than 5.7. So we tell our patients who are who have gestational diabetes or pregnant patients in general that we want their A1Cs fasting to be between 80 and 100, and 2 hours after they eat, we want it to be 120 or less. Right? So pretty stringent, much more than we do with our other patients. And then how quickly can you lower A1C? Now, this is an interesting one. How quickly can you lower A1C? Technically, you can lower it as quickly as possible, right? And quickly as possible means that you've got to wait until all the cells, remember they live for on average 90 to 120 days. You got to wait till all those cells have gone away and new cells that are there with a lower A1C before you can see an A1C that's lower, right? So it is a function of time, but theoretically, right, if I were able to kind of replace all of your cells today and your blood sugars are better today, then your A1C would be in the normal range, right? But practically speaking, so I have patients who come back to see me maybe 2-3 weeks later, and if we happen to check an A1C or they have an A1C done, the A1C is still high. And sometimes they're not sure why that is because they look at their blood sugars that they've been getting at home, and those blood sugars are near perfect, right? They're 110, 112, 104, 99, and yet the A1C is 9. And that's because we've not given enough time yet for those blood sugars to represent themselves in the A1C. Because those cells are still in the body from 2-3 months ago or 2 months ago maybe that have a higher A1C. Okay, all right, guys. Thank you once again. Glad that you are here. Always glad that you guys are coming through. This is Dr. Dwayne Wood from Diabetes and Endocrine Wellness Center and the Light Away. And here on the channel, I educate, I empower, and I encourage you to take charge of your health and your life so you can avoid complications and live a healthy, fulfilling life. Thanks for coming by. We will see you next week at the next video. Let's get some music and let's get on out of here. Bye-bye.